Hi everyone. Welcome to our discussion, or I should say my lecture on graphics. So I'm really happy to talk to you a little bit today about graphics and how to incorporate them into different kinds of papers. And with this video, I'm going to need you to have either at the side of the video on screen or print it out and beside you the graphics PowerPoint that I'm going to include in this assignment on Canvas. So it's called graphics. The first slide is parts of a toilet. I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible. And interactive sounds really weird when you're talking about, this is a video, Seema, you're delivering information to me. How could this possibly be interactive? I'm going to have moments in here where I'd like you to pause the video and write some stuff down. And of course, I won't know if you've done it, that I can't see what you're doing while you're watching this video, but really to get the benefit of this and to really think about these graphics in different ways, it'll be great if you can pause the video, write a few things down or reflect on things and then come back to it. So that is an approximation of what I would do in class discussion, where I would ask you guys questions and have you pipe in with your thoughts. Unfortunately, you won't be able to, if you're doing this just as the video, get your classmates' thoughts as well, but I will kind of bring in a lot of students' feedback from previous years and give you some ideas of things that people have noticed in these different graphics. So let's go ahead and get started. And as you start this PowerPoint, again, you might want to have it on one side of the screen and my video on the other, or you could pull it up on like your phone and have it on one side and then me on the other, set it up however you want. So, okay, so I'm going to try and play this from current slide, but it's making me go full screen, so never mind. We're going to start with parts of a toilet here, and this is from a really long time ago, 2000, from How Stuff Works, which is a website that just describes how stuff works. So, first of all, for a website called How Stuff Works or something like that, who do you think the audience is? So take a moment, pause this, write down some things that you would know about the intended audience for this graphic. Okay? Great, welcome back. So the audience for this would be the general public. It would not be plumbers. And you can look at it, you can kind of tell that. This is the basics. So we're not talking about people in the field. It's not somebody who deals with toilets for a living or even sells toilet parts. It's going to be a really general public audience. It's also not necessarily somebody who is trying specifically to fix a toilet right now, because you would need more information than this to be able to fix a toilet. How stuff works. General public that's interested, we don't know their education level because it'll be all over the place. And when you don't know a general public education level, a good reading level to shoot for is about 8th grade reading level. So, this is weird, but Microsoft Word will do this. You can run readability statistics on it to see roughly what reading level it is. And is it perfect? No, it's Microsoft Word. Of course, it's not perfect, but it'll give you an idea. If you're in the, 7th or 8th grade reading level range, your words are simple enough that the general public isn't really going to have to think too hard to make sense of them. They're not going to have to be looking things up in a dictionary and stuff like that. They're just going to be able to read it and it'll be really accessible. So, you might have some people who are reading this stuff and they're in high school. You might have some people who are elderly and they have a high school education or went to college but so long ago. So this is not going to be overly academic. It's supposed to be pretty simple and yet informative, right? So we're interested in how a toilet works. And here we are looking at this graphic, either because we clicked on it from social media or because we actually went to look it up because we were curious. And so here it is. Now, if you have run the PowerPoint to show the actual PowerPoint, the actual slideshow, you can click it and it'll flush. So it depends on your version of PowerPoint as well, but try it. See if it flushes. It's super cool. And so that's an interactive graphic, which is really neat. And it shows how the filler float goes down and then back up and what the chain is doing and kind of where the water is going in this whole thing. So let me ask you the main question of this slide, which is how well does this graphic accomplish its purpose? And as you think about it, I'd like you to maybe write down some strengths and weaknesses that you see. So pause, write some stuff down, and we'll come right back. All right, welcome back. I think that some of you might have a really comprehensive list of strengths and weaknesses. Others might have just kind of like, hey, it looks good. It's clear. So it is quite clear. The animated nature of it, the sort of big black lines as outlines, make it very easy to see. They didn't overload it with a lot of details. Probably each of these parts has a bunch of subparts. A bunch of little things, right? That filler valve might have 3 or 4 things about it. The filler float might have different parts, but they didn't go into that level of detail because it would be overwhelming. You'd have so many pieces and so many things labeled that maybe if they needed to go into detail about the filler valve itself, they could do it in a different graphic or something like this. So it's got a nice level of detail for the audience and for the graphic itself. The interactive thing is really cool, the flushing. I thought that was really, really neat when I saw it. I think that there are a lot of other strengths as well. There's an attention to detail that's really nice here. If you look at filler valve, filler float, overflow tube, flush valve, bowl, and siphon, they're lined up on the left margin. And then the arrows are parallel with each other. Did they have to be? No, they didn't have to be. But it looks so nice and so professional to have everything lined up that way. And the arrows are all parallel, and then they're pointing at each thing. And then handle and tank, the arrows are also parallel. I believe, I can't quite tell, but I believe handle, tank, and rim, I believe the words are actually lined up with each other on the left margin. It's just a little bit hard to tell because of where the arrows are. Rim, they couldn't have a parallel arrow, so they went perpendicular. And that nice, clean 90-degree angle works really well. So, you know, it's a little choice, but it's one that shows attention to detail and just that little bit of polish and a little bit of professionalism, which is really nice. Think about their color choice. You might be like, well, of course water is light blue. Why? Why is water light blue? It's kind of interesting to think about. The water in a toilet is not light blue, unless you have one of those like cleaning things in there that makes the water blue every time. But the water's clear, right? But we can't do clear in an image because in a graphic like this, it would be unclear what's the water and what's the airspace, right? So we're stuck with a color. And traditionally, we use light blue to denote water. We do it in all kinds of graphics, so it might not be something you've ever thought about before. But it is kind of weird. You might say, okay, well, like the ocean is blue, and like rivers are blue. And sometimes they are. But sometimes rivers are brown. Sometimes they're clear, and what's underneath is kind of gray or brown. A very clear creek would look a little bit gray-brown. It wouldn't look blue. Blue is something that we associate with very clean, bright oceans. Those ocean pictures that you see with the sunset and the beautiful beach. It's always this blue sea. Interestingly, in old literature, even as recent as Shakespeare, they often describe the ocean as green. And so maybe if blue hadn't become the default color of water, we'd be looking at green water here. I think part of it too is what we think of as clean being the opposite of what we think of as dirty, right? So we don't want the water to be yellow or brown, even though that would be quite accurate before you flush it, right? But if you want a nice clean image, you want to go the opposite of yellow, right? The opposite of orange or some bright like that. You don't want red, right? That would be weird. So they go with blue, which doesn't seem like it has any sort of weird scum growing in it. Green could be like some sort of algae growth on something. We're not really sure. So blue is kind of a neutral color that doesn't have connotations of anything to do with like, you know, the sorts of things that end up in a toilet or dirty water, sewage, you know, lakes that have scum growing on them or anything like that. And that's kind of why we end up with light blue as water. I think it's interesting to think about. I mean, you're probably not even going to consciously make that decision. If you're doing a graphic that has water, it'll just be light blue, and you'll be like, well, of course it's light blue. It's always light blue. But it's always nice to think about where your decisions come from rather than just defaulting to them. And this one is one that you would default to, but maybe what shade of blue you use might be a good choice, kind of, that you're trying to figure out. I think some of their other color choices are a little less great. The purple on the flush valve is pretty visible, and purple's a nice color to have in there. I would have put an outline, a black outline around it to make it clearer. And I definitely would have put a black outline around that filler float and the chain that comes down from the inside of the handle. You might not even see the chain, or you might not have even noticed it first because the contrast is horrible. Also, it's yellow, which is not necessarily something that's a really great choice for toilet. But, you know, it's okay. I think it would have worked very well if it had a black outline around it, but they didn't do it. And then with the chain, you know, if it had little outlines on each little piece or something like that. The chain could have just been black, though, and that would have had really nice contrast. We would have been able to see it. I think as you wonder, like, hey, what were their choices for orientation? I think of this toilet in profile. So, you know, like with the face, you've got your, you know, you've got your front view, and then you've got your 3/4 view, and then you have profile, which is like sideways. I'm looking sideways. I think of this as a toilet in profile. You're not looking directly at it. You are looking at it from the side, and that works probably better than any other viewpoint because you have to be able to see the shape of that siphon, and you want to be able to see the overflow tube. But if it's behind everything, then if you looked straight on at the toilet, a bunch of stuff would be stacked, and you wouldn't be able to see them as clearly. So I think that was a really nice choice from them as well. As you put graphics together, you might not be consciously making these choices. You might just be kind of defaulting to things, and I would urge you to make conscious choices. They may be the things that your mind sort of instinctually went to anyway, but you might tweak it a little bit. You might say, hey, I started here, but I think I actually want to go with like a 3/4 view because there's something that I want visible that isn't visible with the toilet in profile. So something to think about. All right, on to the next one. So I'm going to move us to this next graph. So the question for this slide is, where does this graph go wrong? And it goes wrong a lot of places. So after I explain this, here's what I'm going to have you do. Grab your notebook paper or whatever, your Word document that you have on the side. Pause this video and write down all the things that you find wrong with this. Okay. Welcome back. Are you sure you have them all? You can pause it again. Try to write down a few more. There's a lot wrong with this. All right. So let's think about what we might have found. What is this graph for? Its title is useless. Bahamas Beach is perhaps the location of this thing that seems like maybe it's a resort or something. That's not a well-titled graph. So if title was one of the things that was on your list, then great, because that's something that's wrong here. How many of you realized that recreation, which is that light yellow, has squares on the top of the graph, and the squares are connected. The first time I saw this, I didn't realize that the squares were connected either. So if you didn't see it, that's pretty normal. If you saw it, wow, your eyes are awesome. That is like off-white. That color is not yellow even. How are you supposed to see it on a white background? So that's wrong with it. But there's some really bigger fundamental things wrong with even than the color choice. So these are percentages, right? Let's take a look at that first data point. And we'll talk about the order of the data points in a minute because that's ridiculous. But looking at the first data point, which appears to be April, we've got 60% accommodation, whatever that means. We've got food and drinks at 80%, and we've got recreation at 100% of your revenue, roughly. So that means we have 100 plus 80 plus 60%. So somehow we got 240% of our revenue from these three things. If these are percentages, what the heck is going on? It makes no sense. And then weirdly, in other places, we don't add up to 240%. We add up to different percents. It's hard to understand the logic of the person that put this graph together, but what I think is going on here is they were trying to make a stacked bar chart. So that's the one where you have like the bottom bar would be accommodation, and then on top of it for the next 20% would be food and drinks, and on top of it for the next 20% would be recreation. But instead of stacking a bar chart, they connected data points. They graphed them as points. So this is inaccurate. It's not accurate that food and drinks was 80% of the revenue in April. It's just not true. It looks like it was actually 20%. So if you've decided to graph it in this way, graph the percentages properly, graph them accurately, and then we'll see that we didn't get 100% of our revenue from recreation every single month. This is split up into pieces. Okay, so let's talk about that x-axis. Did you notice the x-axis? It's ridiculous. It's amazing. I mean, I found this graph on the internet. I am sure that it was done to be ridiculous because there's no way that any reasonable human would make this choice. And I don't think Excel would do it for you, but it's possible that Excel would because Excel sometimes reorders information, or if you have it sort, it will default to a certain thing. So any idea why these months are in the order they're in? It's alphabetical order. They put the months in alphabetical order. Seriously. April, August, December, February. This is insane. Why would you graph something with months if you don't want to see a trend over time? If you're just going to do random individual data points that don't relate to each other in any way, I mean, I guess a table would be a good choice for that, but even so, they do relate to each other. There's nothing about months that doesn't relate to each other. Like, there is a trend, and it seems like December, February, June, March, and September had the most on accommodation, and I'm not sure why. Maybe the holidays or something. And something. But if you're looking at trends here, you can't see them if you put the things out of order. So part of the moral of that story, you guys are engineers, so you know this is ridiculous. You are smart. But part of the thing here is don't let Excel default you to something and you don't realize that Excel has done it. Because that is insane. You might as well not graph the information at all. So there's other things that are poor choices here. We've got kind of unlabeled axes. The x-axis is month, but we don't know what year this is, and maybe the title of the graph would tell us that or should tell us that, but we don't know what year it is. Revenue, it's like percentage of revenue. Actually, the y-axis is percentage of revenue. It's not the actual revenue, so that's inaccurate. That's not what the y-axis label should be. It's also not where the y-axis label should be. It should be on the left with those numbers, so we know that it's a y-axis label. Did you need 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100 to have two significant figures after the decimal point? No. No, we're not going to that level of precision. We're going 0, 20, 40, 60, 100. There's no reason for it to be 0.00 afterwards, other than that Excel did that to them. So be careful with that as well. If you're looking at much smaller numbers, then you're going to start getting into where decimal points are reasonable and they're significant. The grid pattern on this is not great. Those are very heavy black lines, and it makes it a little hard to see what's going on where. I would have maybe chosen gray for the in-graph grid lines, but that's the least of their concerns here. Really, they've got a lot more to fix than just that. Even the legend, when you take a look at that legend, it's organized in alphabetical order too, right? And Excel will do that for you usually. Those three things are in the opposite order than the graph. So the graph has recreation on top, and it's got food and drinks in the middle, and it's got accommodation on the bottom. If you were doing a legend, put them in the order that they are in the graph. Better yet, if it's possible and the graph is big enough, do an arrow to each of the lines and let us see the legend information pointing to the actual line. So we don't have to look back and forth to figure out what's what. So yeah, that's a lot of problems. That's a lot of stuff. This is just a very good example of a very terrible graph. So that might not be all the things wrong with it. I think we've got a good list though. All right, so let's move on to number 3 over here. And this is a little less clear cut. These are not horrible. Neither of them are horrible. There are things that are good or bad about both of them. So again, take a moment to pause this video and write down strengths and weaknesses of each. If there's something that you like better in the pie chart versus the bar chart, you can say so. If there's something that's problematic about one or the other, say so. So take a moment, maybe divide your paper in half and write down things you think about both of them. Okay, so here you are. So let's see. Let's take a look at the pie chart first. There are some strengths here. Pie charts are really nice for seeing that everything actually indeed does add up to 100%. So we can't see that exactly on the other graph. And you might say, well, I'm an engineer. I can look at those numbers and I know that they add up to 100. It takes you some processing time, at least, right? To look at that 46% that's trolls in the bottom right over there, that black line, and then to look at the ellipse, which looks like it's right at 25, and so on, and then trying to mentally add them up. And, you know, are you left with other? Are you left with not other? I don't know. So, so knowing that they add up to 100%, the pie chart's really nice for that. So pie charts do have their place, and it's really when we want at a glance to be able to see the makeup of that 100%, what percentage is what. So I'm not sure with either of these what they're measuring. These graphs or these charts need a title. I thought, like, okay, it looks like some sort of, you know, maybe breakdown of the types of fictional creatures that end up in some, or that are apparent in some fictional world. And I sort of tossed this to my students once, and I was like, I don't know, this is like, you know, maybe Lord of the Rings or something, except trolls are not that prominent in Lord of the Rings, but like some sort of world. These are the creatures in it. One of my students raised his hand and he said, it's the internet. And I thought, that is perfect. Yes, 46% of the internet is probably trolls. But yeah, so some sort of fictional creatures in some sort of fictional world. There's elves and gremlins, orcs and dragons, billy goats. So looking at the pie chart, strengths and weaknesses. This is one of the pie charts that has the one pie piece broken out, and it looks like it's because we're supposed to put particular emphasis on trolls, and that is that's also apparent by the fact that trolls are purple, but the others are blue. If any of you are colorblind, you won't really be able to see it, or even if you're red-green colorblind, the difference between blue and purple is red. So sorry about that, but if you're colorblind and you can't see it, trolls is purple, and the rest are various shades of blue. So trolls has particular emphasis, it's broken out, and you can do that, and it works, it emphasizes that thing. We can't see the actual percentages, and that would be nice to know. We get a lot more of that information in the other chart, but it doesn't have to be that way. Excel or whatever software you're using will let you put the percentage on the label. So trolls on that pie piece, you could have 46% underneath it. And that would work. So I would suggest to that person, put the actual percentage on each of those. Did they need a legend? No, that's extra. And you might say, ooh, but I like the legend. What if they did the legend, but not the labels on the pie chart? Well, then every time you want to know what's what, you have to look back and forth. And you do not want to make your viewer or your reader look back and forth any more than they need to. So get rid of the legend. Just have the labels on the pie chart. That also solves the problem, and this is a bit of a problem. It solves the problem of these blues being really similar. On my screen that I'm looking at right now, orcs and billy goats, those blues are not that similar. On other screens that I've pulled it up on before in class, you can't tell the difference between the orc blue and the billy goat blue. I get what they were going for, this gradient of blue. Trolls, not trolls, right? For those of you who have seen Silicon Valley, that reminds me of hot dog, not hot dog. But, you know, all the things that are not trolls, we want those colors to be different enough, and there might have been a different way of doing that. Elves is really dark, right? Gremlins is less dark, orcs is less dark, dragons is less dark. By that I mean lighter, I guess. Billy goats could be the lightest blue of all, and it would actually be easier to see. And then if you print it in black and white, it would also be easy to see. So, so that might be a better color choice. Okay, so then on the other graph, they've also emphasized trolls by making the text bigger and making that line black, and everything else is gray. It's cool because we can really see how all these minor creatures compare to each other better than you can see on the pie chart. On the pie chart, billy goats, dragons, and maybe even, well, billy goats and dragons look like the same size to me. And orcs and gremlins look like the same size. But as it turns out, on the other chart, you can see that there are slightly more gremlins than orcs, and there are slightly more dragons than billy goats. In fact, orcs and dragons are maybe more similar than billy goats and dragons. Maybe because of the color choices, it made me look at dragons and billy goats as more similar on the other graph. So on the black and white graph, or on the gray graph, we can really see gremlins, orcs, dragons, billy goats in order and see how they compare to each other. So if the emphasis is on comparing them to each other rather than looking at pieces of the whole, then a bar chart might be a better choice. So it's kind of interesting. Even with percentages, I think with percentages, sometimes people just default to a pie chart. They're like, oh, it's a percent, I'm going to do a pie graph. Think about it. Just anytime you're going to graph something or chart something, think about it. Just think, what would be the best format for this? How would I be able to visualize what I'm doing or communicate this information in the best possible way? And there's no right answer to it. It depends on what you want to emphasize. So now we're going to move in. This might be my favorite thing of this whole PowerPoint. I'm not sure. I've got a couple of favorites. But move on to slide 4 and look at this thing. Let me tell you what it was. It was an actual brochure and poster, but brochure that was sent in the mail to visual communications professionals, and it is for a conference called VizThink 08, so it's kind of old. VizThink 08, a visual communications conference for people who make graphics for a living. Okay, So look at this thing. And I would like you to, if you have it printed out, you're going to be able to write on it. If you're looking at it on screen, again, take some notes in your notebook or on your Word document or something. Pause this and write down all the things you notice. Good, bad, medium, whatever. And then we'll talk about them. Okay, pause. Welcome back. So I'm gonna full screen this because I've got so much to say about it. Let me view this. Play from current slide. All right, I'm looking at it. It is wild. There's so much going on here. There's really so much going on here. It's extremely busy. And that's probably the biggest thing about it. You feel like you're just being assaulted by this image of all this stuff. My first thought, so I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the books Where's Waldo? It's like a sea of cartoon people, and you have to find Waldo. He's this guy in glasses and a little hat, and he's got a red and white striped shirt. This reminds me of Where's Waldo? I feel like I have to go find Waldo in here. It's so much. I don't think that these are actual conference titles for the papers. I think it's some of the things that you're going to be able to learn there. But it's very ambiguous. It's very difficult to see what's going on. Apparently, we're going to be able to solve complex and messy problems. Excellent, because this seems like a complex and messy problem. We're going to be able to create better business presentations somewhere in here. Okay, there's all this stuff. There's so many things, and this is the what you will learn. And then there appears to be something in the top right corner that looks like a boxing ring, and then some sort of workshops on a circle platform. Maybe that's not a table, that's a platform of some sort. So there's all this different stuff. Then we've got what you will gain, which apparently is different than what you will learn. And those little bubbles on the right-hand bottom are like, there's this little guy in a suit that looks like a Minecraft guy in a suit, or a Lego guy. And then it's all these things that he will gain. Problem-solving skills, Rubik's Cube, facilitation skills, marker, and that kind of thing. So, so there's that. And of course, you know, think about this. You know, men and women, it doesn't matter who you are. We are socialized to default to that thing that we think of when we think of like a professional. So here, it's a guy in a suit. It's a white guy in a suit. I wonder, are the people in this all white people? Let me look. I'm gonna look closer here. Maybe. It's hard to tell. But certainly the main characters on the left-hand panel. Oh wait, there's one person who's in process hell at the bottom of the left-hand panel who is not a white guy. But, you know, having this default professional be a white guy with a tie, that does a disservice to the rest of us. You know, whether you're watching this class in the semester that I taped it or you're watching this later, if you think about the makeup of your class, it's not all white guys. And so you're engineers of the future. Guess what? Visual communicators, also not all white guys. Wouldn't it be nice if we got rid of the trope of the clueless white guy who is the professional but doesn't know this thing and then goes to this conference and comes away with all these skills and, you know, hooray, and made it feel like a conference that was actually for lots of different people. Then there's a Barnes & Noble in the bottom corner. I don't know. Okay, I get it. You can buy books. Maybe it's sponsored by Barnes & Noble. This is not a map. It doesn't seem like. It seems like just like they want to get you the feel of what this would be like. And I do not want to go to a conference where I am going to be in a sea of highlighter yellow. Oh my gosh, this is a terrible color choice as well. It's too bright. Depending on the screen you're looking at it on, it looks like highlighter yellow a lot of the time. On my screen right now, it's kind of at least a better yellow than that. You know, it's kind of more like a true yellow. But on some screens, it's really highlighter yellow. It's really, really bright. right. And then the left panel, the left little comic is actually quite funny. If you read it, it's got a lot of humor in it. They could almost have just done that. Actually, that would have been way better. If you take a look at it, I'm going to zoom in on it again. It's funny. So it's like what you will solve. And it's death by PowerPoint. And here's the guy who's going to the conference in his tie. And he's like, slide 127, we're halfway through now. And then the person watching is sleeping. And then there's some sort of robot behind him. I don't know what's going on there. And then you've got a paper airplane going through each part. So you got part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. These are the things that are problems. Analysis, paralysis, and it's this crazy Excel spreadsheet. Then I find ineffective communication to be pretty hilarious. The Thai guy says, come on, we just need to row a little harder. Take a look at that boat. And then the other guy says, is he kidding? But he doesn't say it, he's thinking it. And then what he says is right on. So that's ineffective communication. You are noticing what's going on, which is, by the way, if you haven't seen it yet, there's 4 oars on one side and 3 on the other. So you're not going to get a balance. They're missing an oarsman and an oar, or an oars person. Sorry, I was talking about being gender neutral. There you go. We all do it. I think just keep an eye on it. So then we're down to the next thing again, where it's process hell, and it's we're behind schedule again, and there's just papers everywhere, and there's like hard drives flying. I don't know what all is over there, but it's kind of funny. And then this guy goes into this conference, and he shows up at all these panels, and he walks out with all these skills. If they just maybe had 1, 2, 3, 4 from the left panel, that comic, and then maybe the skills that he gained at the end, this would be a much different ad. It would be a much different thing. But with all that other stuff, the most clever things in here get totally missed. I think it's like they weren't sure what decisions to make, so they made all of them. So that's the thing. I find this very ironic that this was for visual communicators, because I think it is just one of the worst examples of visual communication. It really, like, okay, sometimes less is more, you guys. Not more is more. Really, just decide what the most important things are and focus on those. All right, so we're going to go on to the next slide. Slide 5 is a Marimekko chart. I do not know if I'm pronouncing that right, so I'm very sorry if I'm not. This is kind of an interesting setup, and they do use it. And I know those of you who are in the business school have talked about how, like, these do actually get used in the B school. They're fairly common. There are strengths and weaknesses to it. I'm going to argue that there are more weaknesses than strengths. So a strength is that you really do get to see a lot of information in one graph, which is cool. But there are some weaknesses too. So this is a lot to look at. Take a moment, pause this video, and write down some things that you notice, or some strengths, weaknesses, questions that you have, anything like that. Okay, so welcome back with your list. We've got Marimekko chart. Okay, so that's the title of this thing. But then Nike dominates its top 4 competitors with a mix of US and international sales. That's the title of the graph. That's kind of cool. It's a sentence that is what they want the takeaway to be. They want us to see this, and it's the takeaway from the graph, which is cool. And in fact, look at Nike. It's gigantic. Those pieces are gigantic. Here's what's going on, though, that's a little bit weird. We've got percentage of their own sales as the y-axis. So, like, Nike adds up to 100% if you add their US sales and their international. But then on the y-axis, not only is it the names of each company, but the width of that rectangle indicates the total footwear sales in dollars. You are engineers. How good are you at looking at area of something and comparing it to area of something else? Probably pretty all right at it. Guess what? The rest of us aren't. This graph does what it sets out to do, which is to show Nike dominating. because Nike dominates. If you put these bars next to each other, that 6.4 million, no, that's in millions. Oh, that's not 6.4. That's 6,437 million. So that's 6.4 billion. Okay. This is obviously a really long time ago, because if you look at Reebok, it's higher than Adidas. Converse is kind of at the end. There's a lot of, Under Armour's not on there. So it would be very different now. But we've got 6.4 billion versus the next competitor, Reebok, at 2.6 billion. So Nike should look, I'm going really, really roughly here, like, because I'm estimating in my head right now, maybe 2.5 times bigger than Reebok. But it looks bigger than that because we're looking at area, not just length. So that emphasis did end up working out well for Nike. It takes up half the darn graph. But it's a little bit misleading. Also, apparently Reebok, Adidas, Fila, and Converse have licensed sales. And I'm not sure what those are, but Nike doesn't. So its US and international look bigger. Maybe those licensed sales, those licensed sales, whatever they are, surely they're either in the US or international. If they're not, you need an explanation somewhere here, because it's making Reebok's US sales look probably smaller than they are, because some of those licensed sales are probably in the US. If they're not in the US and they're not international, where are they? I don't know. So that's a question. The labeling's a little weird. You've got US in the gray box on Nike, and then international, which they should have just spelled out. Surely that rectangle is big enough for them to spell the word international out. We don't need to abbreviate it. But then licensed is gone and labeled on Reebok. This is kind of weird. What do you think of the color choices? US and international, they're a color scheme that goes together. They're kind of blah. They're a little bit subdued. Sometimes corporate color schemes look like that. Cool. I think of Nike as a cooler company than gray and pastel maroon, but maybe they're not. So maybe we end up with this sort of corporate looking color scheme. Except for the blue. The blue is so bright in comparison to these other two. It actually stands out quite a lot more. So if what we wanted to do was emphasize Nike, we did the opposite. We emphasized the question, what the heck is licensed sales and why does Nike not have them? This is a color that does not go with the others. So Word and PowerPoint and Excel, they have color schemes, and actual artists have put together these color schemes. Some of them are kind of ugly, but they're supposedly colors that go together. So I would suggest picking a color scheme and staying within it. They'll at least be similar in saturation or in feel. Maybe there would have been this gray for the US and the pastel maroon, I'm calling it, for international. Maybe that blue would have been a more sort of subdued, I don't know, like the billy goat on the Trolls slide, kind of a gray blue. Because we've got a gray, we have kind of a gray maroon, and we could have a gray blue, and it would go with it, or navy, or something like that. Though navy is probably more saturated than we would want for going with these other two. So even the color choices are things to think about. I personally am not a huge fan of Marimekko charts because I think thinking about area distorts the message, because we have to kind of unpack what's going on the x-axis and on the y-axis. Sometimes, and I've had business school students particularly who use this a lot, argue that it's a really great way to get a lot of information into one chart. And if the audience is all in an area of business where they use these charts a lot, then they are better at deciphering them. But I would like you to make choices, for the most part, that would be decipherable to people outside of your field as well. So if you move to slide 6, what am I looking at? There we go. It's the same information, but broken up in different ways. If you're interested in knowing by company the total footwear sales, top left, Nike, Reebok, Adidas, Fila, Converse. Nike still looks huge. In fact, in some ways it looks huger. So if you want to emphasize how crazy in the lead Nike is, it still does it. Total footwear sales by channel, US, international, and licensed. That seems maybe a little less useful, I don't know, especially if you're trying to look at Nike as the emphasis, but that's cool. There's that information. Then if you break it down by US and international, on the bottom left, it's going company by company, US, international, and so on, licensed. And they've got it in dollars and percents. I think that works out. I'm looking at the math to see, but it should work out to where you can look at the dollars and the percents, and you can have that double y-axis, and they actually go with each other, which works. And then on the other side, it's the same information that's on the left bottom, moved to the right bottom, but instead of being company by company, it's US, international, and licensed, so we can compare them, compare each piece to each other. So yeah, so that's that. Now we're going to get into the more humorous part of this. There's some really like delightfully bad examples here. So move on to slide 7. The question of this is what's wrong with this graph, or I should ask what, if anything, is right about this graph. There's not much right about this graph. So take a moment, pause this video, write some stuff down about what you think you notice that's wrong with it. Okay? So there's a lot that's wrong with it. Really. I'm sure that you have some things on your list. If you're like, you know, I've only wrote 2 things down. Pause it again and write more things down. There's a lot that's wrong about this. Okay. So we have some sort of survey, apparently entitled Goals. And then we have 200 total surveys. And I don't know whether that green box was supposed to be over the thing. I mean, it looks like that's like whatever program this is that was creating this. It was like a little bit of advice for them, from them, you know, a little pop-up or something that never got taken away. Question topics are used in the legend. No, that's not from Excel or whatever. That's something the person wrote and then put on top of their y-axis. The displayed chart can be edited. Well, that might be a form message. It's hard to tell. So we've got agree strongly, agree slightly, neutral, disagree slightly, disagree strongly. Then we have the legend. So these are the survey questions, apparently. Goals. Agree with goals. Wait a second. So that means that I could agree with goals, but disagree with goals. Then I've got understanding, but I don't know what I'm understanding. So that's pretty ironic. Priorities are understood is apparently very different than understanding, because those two strips are kind of opposite each other. When red is low, blue is high. When blue is low, red is high. Meaningful input. So yeah. So we're looking at all of these. You could also ask yourself, is graphing them on a graph as data points that you connect the right way to go here? It's not really a continuum. So no, it's not the right way to go. Or if you graph them as data points, they're points, but you don't connect them. You could make an argument that it's a continuum, but it's a little hard to make, especially because neutral is in the middle there. If there's a dip in neutral, what does that mean, really? So there's other things that are wrong with this. The color choices, this looks like a pack of highlighters. I mean, at least they go with each other. At least they do all look like a pack of highlighters, but it's pretty wild. The elephant in the room here, the biggest thing wrong with this is that they've shifted it into 3D, which is ridiculous. This is a 2-dimensional graph. It has a y-axis and an x-axis. There is no reason to graph things in 3 dimensions unless you have a z-axis. If you are graphing it in 3 dimensions, then you have a 3-dimensional graph. Otherwise, do not take your 2-dimensional graph and distort it. And we can talk about why, but right now, you know, and I do have other slides where we'll take a look at that. But right now, all you need to know is look at this thing. Some of them overlap each other. You can't really see them. The stuff in the background is really hard to see. it's hard to see what's going on. 3Ding things distorts them. So yeah, this is terrible. Just terrible. So now, if you click to slide 8, this is way better. It may not be perfect, but it's way, way better. So if you want to, take a moment, pause, write down some strengths and weaknesses of this graph compared to the previous one. Same data. Okay, so strengths. We've got the actual survey questions in here. The company is on track to meet its goals. You agree with the goals. You understand the goals. You understand the priority of the goals. Questions 4 and 5, or I mean 3 and 4, a little bit similar. I get that they're different. Is this the way I would have worded a survey? No, but it's the way the survey was worded. And then the company encourages meaningful employee input regarding the goals. Okay, so we know what the questions were. And we've got disagree strongly, disagree, disagree slightly, neutral, agree slightly, agree strongly. I like the color gradient. It's a neat way to do it. It's, again, that sort of corporate color scheme. It's not super bright, but that's okay. Typically in American culture, the things that are red tend towards the more negative, and I know that is very different in Eastern cultures, but we think of red as negative numbers, stoplights, things that are bad. And so all the disagrees, like it gets redder and redder as you go to the disagree side of things, and then it makes its way over to blue as we agree. So that's kind of a neat color spectrum, and neutral's pretty much gray, which is neutral. Putting these as bars next to each other works really well as well. These are employee responses regarding company goals, so it's got a nice title. There's no y-axis label. We need that. Number of employees, something like that. Number of responses. So there's that. Let's move on to slide 9. There we are. All right. If you've never seen one of these before, you will probably have a lot to write down about it. Even if you have seen one before, if you play video games, you probably have. You're going to have a lot to write down about it. So take a moment, pause the video, write down some stuff that you see, strengths, weaknesses, questions. Okay. So here we are. The first time I saw this, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't even take in anything from this. It is so crazy. I thought really there were no redeeming qualities to it. And I've had students convince me over the years that there are redeeming qualities to it. And I will give you that. And I will say that if you want to include something like this, you're going to have to include more information than just it. So we have it's reviewing these 3 employee candidates, Karen Fortu, Jack Nimble, and Mike Raffin. And they are connected. These points are connected. We've got experience, education, presentation, subject matter knowledge, friendliness, and communication. And so they've been rated on some sort of scale that we don't know on each of these. And not having the scale on here is a problem. So I would suggest if they were really doing it and they really wanted to do this, it appears from the next slide, you'll see that they were rated on a scale of 0 to 5. And 0 would be right in the middle and 5 would be on the edges. That's the best. So, so stuff that's on the edges is the best. And then at a glance, you can kind of see each candidate and their strengths. So I can see how at a glance this would work. Probably it would be better if if it was 3 separate and they didn't overlap each other, because those 2 blues overlapping, it's just really kind of hard to see what's going on there. You know, it's easy to mistake one blue for the other. Also, the organization of these is not great. So we've got at the top experience, right? Then you go to the right, just kind of around the wheel, clockwise. Communication, friendliness. Okay, those 2 things go together. Subject matter knowledge. That doesn't really go with communication, friendliness. That seems to go more with experience. Then we've got presentation. Oh, that's more like communication. And then we've got education, which is like subject matter knowledge. If we were going to do this, and if we group them together the way they really should be, which is flipping subject matter knowledge and presentation. So you've got the 3 subject matter things together, and then you've got the 3 people skills things together. suddenly Mike Raffin would look a lot less good. He wouldn't have as much area in his shape because he's got all the subject matter knowledge, experience, and education in the world, but he should not be in front of clients. Like, he is not a client-facing guy. You can see it. Presentation, friendliness, and communication, like, lower than anyone else in anything. So I think reorganizing would help us see that Mike Raffin is all the way on one side and really not a well-balanced candidate. If you want somebody who's not client-facing, who is just awesome at grinding out the work, then he's your guy. As long as he interviews well, you know. But he probably won't interview well because apparently he has no people skills. If he can do the work, I guess. So then it looks like Karen Fortune is pretty good at everything. Not absolutely amazing at any one thing, like not a 5 out of 5, but like good. And then Jack appears to be a really good, friendly, fun, people skills kind of person, but he's maybe young and doesn't have a lot of education, experience, or subject matter knowledge. So if you're looking for that, then he would be your guy. So I think kind of having this graph is nice in this way. It's a lot to take in, and you would want more information to go with it, like slide 10. So advance for a second here to slide 10. We can see the numbers. Karen is a 4 on experience. Mike is a 4.5 on experience. They looked a little more different than that in the graph that we had. But as it turns out, they're about the same in experience, whereas Jack is a 2.5. So if you're looking for experience, Jack's not your guy. So you can really analyze the numbers and think about them more if it's in a table and you can look at them together. Mike got a 1.5 on presentation out of 5. It's the lowest of anything in here. So we can't really see how low it is in the other graph. And then looking at their average ratings, we can see that Karen has a better average rating than the other two, but the other two are about the same. So similarly, though, I think they should have in this table put experience, subject matter knowledge, and education together, and then communication, friendliness, and presentation together. So I would reorganize the table if I were doing it. All right, let's move on. Slide 11. Take a moment, write down what you see. Okay, so what's the problem here? You might say there is no problem. They're being accurate. They are being accurate, but when you graph something, you in good faith are telling a story to the person who's looking at it. The reason you graphed it is so they can see at a glance what's going on. And you might say, well, it's on them, if it's a sort of deceptive graph, it's on them to ferret that out and to say, you know what, hey, this isn't a huge increase. But we've gone, it's the end of quarter month, so March is the first quarter. I would just call them first, second, third, and fourth quarter, but whatever. It starts at 100, and it goes up to 110. Here's the thing. If you're not paying attention that much, the impact of a graph like this, you look at it and you go, wow, their increase is huge. And that y-axis tweaking is meant to be deceptive. It really is. When we look at an increase in something, we look at slope. We just do. We look at slope, and you look at that slope, it looks to me like maybe about a 30-degree angle. It's a pretty big slope for an increase. It's from 100 to 110. It's a 10% increase. So just start at 0 and go up to 110. Tell the story honestly. It's still a big deal to get a 10% increase in customers. And if you are honest in your graphs, people will respect that and they will trust you. You might take a cheap shot like this, and in the very, in that moment, everybody's like, woo, wow. And the second they realize what you've done, suddenly you look a little skeezy. So just be true with your y-axis as much as possible. If you're doing percentages, start at 0. And this isn't specifically percentages, but it's increase. We want to see the trend with the increase. And this was not honest. It looks like it's starting at 0. It's not starting at 0. It's starting at 100. 100, whatever, 1,000, 100,000. And it's moving up to 110,000. I don't know, a slope of 1/10 still looks good, you know? Or 1/11th, I guess. No, 1/10. Okay. All right, so this next thing is real. So move to slide 12. And before you look at it too much, let me tell you a little bit about this story. So this was in about 2004 or 5, and it was in the news hard. It was really like in the news a lot. If you ask your parents, they will remember it if they were in America. So there was this lady named Terry Schiavo, and she had been in a coma for a really, really long time on a feeding tube. And the doctors had said she's not getting better. So her husband wanted the feeding tube removed. Said, end of life, feeding tube removed. She's brain dead, she's not recovering. Her parents said, no, we want her on the feeding tube. This husband of hers is trying to kill her. What if she recovers? So there was a court battle about it, and it went on for a really long time, and it was in the news. It was very big. So here's the way it shook out on party lines. Generally speaking, liberals, Democrats, people who identify as, liberal, were pro removal of the feeding tube. They thought the husband should be able to remove the feeding tube. Generally speaking, this is stereotypes again. Republicans or conservatives were more of the vocal voices saying the parents should have the right to keep her on the feeding tube to preserve life. All right, so this graph is from CNN.com. This is real, this happened. CNN is widely regarded as a liberal publication. I know they're trying to be objective or whatever, but they have a liberal spin on a lot of stuff, a Democrat spin on a lot of stuff. So their readers are Democrats, for the most part. I mean, you might be a conservative, you read CNN, that's awesome, it's good to read all kinds of news, right? And this isn't super, super liberal. It's not like, like fake news. It's CNN, it's still a reputable news source, but when you look at something like this, you're like, how reputable are you really? So here's the question that this is a survey of. Based on what you have heard or read about this case, do you agree with the court's decision to have the feeding tube removed? And at a glance, the liberal audience looks at this, and that huge bar for Democrats, and then Republicans and independents. They would pat themselves on the back. Look at those amazing, enlightened Democrats who want this feeding tube removed because they don't want this poor woman to suffer anymore. And look at those backwards Republicans and independents who, look at those numbers. We've got 62, 54, 54. So they're not that different. They're all a majority. They're the same. And if you look at the sampling error, they're actually the same because the sampling error is plus or minus 7%. So it's 53 to 63 here. They made the Democrat bar look like the whole thing, and then the Republicans and independents look like 0 almost. And if you put them 1 to 63 or 0 to 63, you would see they're the same. They're the same height. So this was super deceptive, and they had to take it down and redo it like almost immediately. There was such an outcry about this graph. But luckily, the internet, people got screenshots and posted them. So this is real, and it's from CNN. Okay, so on to the next one. Okay, so we're going to slide 13. It doesn't have a proper title, but the main point here is take a look at it, really. It's, again, like we were talking about those pie charts, or I was talking about not pie charts, I was talking about any kind of graph. This is two-dimensional data, and it's been rotated like this. So it looks like Google has this huge section of this graph. And you might say, you know what, it's on the reader or the viewer to really look at it and think about it and figure out, hey, those are all about a third, a third, a third. But it's not, because this is deceptive. You want it to look like Google is bigger, so you rotated it this way. So when you see this, all you see is blue coming at your face, and that little green and red receding into the background. Put a different way, advance to slide 14. Same data. Now who looks like the winner? Also, what we were talking about with the y-axis, take a look at that y-axis. So that's the other thing that's deceptive about this, but that sort of MSN bar is huge. I mean, obviously this data is from like 2000 because Google would blow these people out of the water, but that's not the point. You know, you look at this, you look at 13, if you flip back and forth again to 13 and then 14, it's the same data, and see how deceptive they're able to be. So that's just my sort of PSA about not making things 3D if they don't have to be 3D. If you have a z-axis, of course it's 3D. Otherwise, 2 dimension, flat. You can still make it look awesome in 2 dimensions. So then, if you want to just see a couple of ridiculous, hilarious things, slide 15. Yeah. To me, it looks like a grain silo, or Pac-Man is eating the other bars. And then 16 is like, I don't even know what I'm looking at here. And my favorite part of this is the legend, by the way. So if you're in slide 16, look at the legend. That's my favorite. I will let that be submitted without comment. The last slide here, slide 17, there's a link to this website. It's kind of, if it's still online, it's kind of funny. I'm gonna see if it is here. Control, click, it says, okay. So, yeah, no, it's not, darn, okay. Well, it was this really old site, and it was this guy selling his book, and it was called How to Lie with Charts. And he had general principles of lying with charts. So one of them was make everything 3D and put the thing you want emphasized in the front if you want to lie, if you want to be unethical. The other one is screw with the y-axis. So all of the advice that's out there on how to lie with charts, you should do the opposite of. You should be honest and let the data speak nicely for itself. And if you have a decrease in something and you wanted to downplay that, well, that sucks. Downplay it in your words, downplay it in the story you tell, but when you present your data, be an honest person and make the data as clear as possible. People will appreciate it. You can talk about that decrease and explain it. You can talk about that one graph that had a 10% increase, how 10% is a really good increase. You don't have to make it look bigger. So just be honest in the work you do. Choose your graphs carefully. Don't let Excel make all your choices for you. And really just think as you're putting something together. Think about graphing it. Think about, do I want to graph data points and do a line graph? Do I want these to be individual bars? Do I want to look at it as a part of a whole percentage? That would be a pie chart. Any other kind of graph that you think of. And there are going to be different decisions. Sometimes you might take the data and graph it a few different ways and see what looks the best to you. So you have a lot of possibilities, really. So that's a lot to think about, I know, and it was kind of a long presentation, and especially if you did your due diligence and actually paused it and wrote stuff down. It took a little while to get through, but I hope that you have come away with a bit of an appreciation for graphs and graphics and a little bit more guidance on how to put them together in a way that really makes sense. If you're not awesome at Excel, that is absolutely okay. Guess what you can do? What did we do in the old days? We drew the graphs. So for your papers or for anything in this class, if you would like to hand draw them, do it. You can still do a great job, honestly. You can still do a really excellent job drawing graphs, coloring them in. If you decide you would like to play around with Excel and have Excel graph things for you, if you're not amazing at it or if you're struggling with it, have a friend from the business school show you. The B school, they use Excel all the time. They graph stuff all the time. So those are your friends that are going to be best at it, and they'll be able to help you out with some of the tricks of the trade. So, you know, of course, there's good YouTube tutorials on the internet and stuff too about just about how to graph stuff. So all of that is a little bit more about graphing and how to do it. I still trial and error my way through it on Excel, and I've been graphing data for a really long time. But because I don't graph data for a living, it's always a bit of a struggle for me. I'm always looking stuff up. How do I organize it in this way? How do I put the labels with the percentages on the pie chart or whatever? But you can find all that on the internet. So just start playing around with it, because by the time you get to the final paper for this class, you are absolutely going to have to graph something. And if not graph, you're going to be using graphics and labeling things. In your mechanism description, you're labeling things. And you're deciding how to place them and what to do with them. So yeah, this is technical communication, not just technical writing. And this is the piece of it that really visual piece of it that makes a lot of data and a lot of information pop, and it makes it very clear for your reader. So thanks very much. Have a good day.